the claims of Vatican I, for example, if you read Satis Cognitum, which is Leo XIII's description and definition of what is supposed to be understood in terms of papal supremacy, Satis Cognitum says that it has always, at all times, been understood that the Roman See had the claims that Vatican I has about it. So in other words, there's no development of doctrine according to Satis Cognitum. It is clearly that the Roman See was indefectible, infallible, and had universal jurisdiction. Now, he likes to say that, well, I don't have to accept these statements from the Chieti document because, well, it's just not infallible. Of course, there is no epistemic criteria for the Roman Catholic for what is actually infallible, because Tim knows that it's more than just a few ex cathedra statements. You also have to believe all the dogmatic teachings in the ordinary universal magisterium. And in fact, there's a whole list of, I'll give you guys the list of these. You can look them up yourself since we don't have time to go through them. Denzinger 1683, Denzinger 1698, Denzinger 1792, Casti Connubii 104 all say that the position is condemned if you say you only follow the ex cathedra magisterial statements. That is a condemned proposition. And it's funny because you actually heard him seem to be arguing that tonight. Now, in regard to...
Just let him conclude, please.
Sorry.
Please. We have 4 hours and 13 minutes.
Because universal ordinary magisterial teaching would be much broader and would bind him and everyone else to a whole bunch of other things. And that's precisely what the point of Vatican I was to say. Now, all I needed was one dogmatic contradiction, which I think we saw with the geopolitical power claims that were necessary for salvation for 900 years. He said, oh, it's just a discipline. That's his way to get around this doctrinal contradiction. But again, I will go back to the famous instance that Ubi brought up to Ibarra, which Ibarra didn't have an answer to, and which I will reassert again from the Papacy and the Orthodox. Pope Vigilius submitted to the Ecumenical Council because he was threatened with excommunication and removal from the diptychs. And that's where he landed. That's where he ended up. That's why Vigilius is such a strong argument against the claim that Jesus instituted this universal supremacy that was from all times, at all times, everywhere, infallible, indefectible from the earliest days. That's what he has to prove. That's why he was deflecting into these passages that don't actually prove that. They prove merely that there's those passages which can be read in an Orthodox sense or in a Roman Catholic sense. He has a system that he has to defend. He tried to say that it's all coherence theory, or so. I don't hold to secular coherence theory, so he doesn't know what he's talking about. The position only requires one contradiction for the whole thing to fall apart. And you can read the most recent Richard Price text on the case of Vigilius. And when Richard Price was on Reason and Theology, and they interviewed him a few years ago, and he said that the Pope did not have universal jurisdiction in the first millennium. Just like the Chieti document says, the Pope did not have universal jurisdiction in the first millennium. That means Vatican I is false, and that's why Vigilius disproves the papacy. And there's many more. Honorius, what, 2 minutes, or we're done?
No, you 2 minutes.
Okay. There's many more. There's also the case of Honorius. Honorius is not just condemned because he supposedly fibbed or failed to condemn. It's actually because he wrote a letter to a bishop. So notice the status of the text. It wasn't ex cathedra. It wasn't magisterium. It was a letter to a bishop where he affirmed monothelitism, and he was successively condemned by, in the East, 3 councils, including the Seventh Ecumenical Council. So Honorius becomes a heretic explicitly. Most Roman Catholics, except for a few, will admit this now today. But that means that the Pope isn't indefectible. And yet Vatican I claims that the See of Peter is indefectible. It is never failing in its truth and in its faith. And yet tonight we've seen in just a handful of examples, and I can give many, many more, that it is in fact failing. And that's why we don't put our hope in a geopolitical world ruler, which now calls for open borders and all of that, who used to say you had to believe in his quizat sadarak, lisan al-gib powers to be saved. Now you don't have to believe it's just a discipline, hand wave it. No. The papacy is a geopolitical tool. And if you go to my channel and watch all of my old videos, you can find the lectures where I've walked through David Wim Hof's excellent book showing that the CIA also bought into and helped to buy out the papacy through Operation Gladio. There's multiple texts from multiple Roman Catholics even on that. So what are we looking at with the papacy? Is it really a center of unity? Or is it a tool of inclusive capitalism, socialism, World Economic Forum, all the stuff that you see Vatican II promoting with the internationalism, a new world order, etc., explicitly in the church in the modern world texts. That's what the papacy actually is. The papacy is not your friend. It is a spiritual cancer, and it does not produce the thing that it claims to produce: unity, holiness, and truth.